Okay, we dropped off a minute there, and now this is the second part. So I want to make sure we don't miss out on any parts, but I think it's interesting. We're talking about technology. Huh. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about communication systems and making sure that the communication systems that you use with your families are the ones that work the best for them, right? So remember that you're trying to find the way to communicate. So you might choose several different ways to reach your diverse family group, right? You might have paper newsletters if they find it really precious and wholesome, right? Keep that if it works. Email, small texts, social media, etc. What other platforms do you use that work for families? And ask them, do these work? It's important frequently to check in and make sure, is this still useful? Is this still useful? To make sure that you're reaching them in a way that they can best receive information, right? Okay, so I think that's all we wanted to talk about that, because it's time to pause and write. So hit the pause button and hit play when you're ready to come back. Okay, now we're back. We're doing it again. We're doing the vote process again. So think about your communication systems and what is it that you want? It may be the universal, what we want is that families read and remain informed. Wouldn't that be great? So finding the best way possible is key here, right? So that's what we want for the most part, yeah? What's the obstacle? What's getting in the way? Next, what are the tools and techniques? What do you need to overcome that? Oh, maybe it could be just as simple as asking your families, or it could be much more complicated by trying something new and different to see if the results are different in connecting with your families and sharing information. All right. And then the emotions. How do you feel about it all? So we'll pause again here, go through that vote method with your earlier goal, and come back when you're ready. Okay, now we're back. Take a deep breath and we'll carry on. Now we've been talking about families and connecting with them through different ways, different kinds of technologies that can assist us in our work and our connection with them. Now let's talk about finding out. So you've heard me say, ask them, find out more. How do you do that? Simply, you can ask them, and that sounds really simple to do if you have a small program and a handful of families. But if you have a larger program, gathering that information one by one can be a bigger task than you're able to do right now. So think about surveys. How can we engage our families through surveys and through survey responsiveness? Now, there are loads of ways to engage your families. When you know what their time and talent can be, what can they do to volunteer? Right? Is somebody super organized and would love to come in and help your teachers on a work day organize their closets? Isn't that a gift? Or is there somebody who loves gardening and who volunteers to spiff up the front entrance of your program, right? Or is it somebody who would like to assist in a fundraising something? They have an idea and it's going to work for you and work for them, and you give them the green light and say, go for it, right? So there are lots of different ways to engage your community in feeling more a part of your program. Remember that sense of belonging is one of the many basic human needs. So contributing and engaging is one way that we could help meet that need for the people in our community. So beyond that, we can, do the old survey, which you probably already do. And if you don't yet, it's okay. Let's get started. There are several things to consider as you're creating a survey and putting it out to your community, right? So here are some things to consider, right? Remember rounding. That tool, man, it is so helpful to find out what's working well. What do you need as a family to feel like an important part of the community? You see how that's a variation? Do you have everything you need to do your job well? And then you can adjust that to speak to your families. right? Gratitude, is there somebody that that deserves a shout out or deserves an appreciation or recognition, right? So remember those questions, and those questions can help be kind of the bones of a survey that you can put out. So let's pause again for another writing prompt. And the first question is this: how do you want to ask? Is it information that you want to find out quickly, right? Do you want to do that one-on-one? How big is your program? How is it that you want to ask? Paper survey, electronic survey? Is it a Google form, some sort of technology that you can use in that way? Another platform that you can use to get the information back in a way that's confidential? That's important too. So think about, how do you want to ask? What works for you? And if it's not working, what other kinds of ways can you use to ask, to find out? So that's number one. Number two is, what is it? Why do you want to ask it, right? Is it to improve your program? Is it to get information for clarity? Why do you want to ask what it is that you want to ask? Who is it that you want to ask? Is it your families? Is it your team? Is it your staff? Is it perhaps a program specific staff? Maybe you want to ask your elementary program teaching teams this particular question or these particular questions, or your preschool or your infant toddler team, right? Who is it that you want to ask, right? Next, when do you want to ask it? When is the best time to ask, right? Beginning of the year, mid-year, at the end of the year, right? When is the best time that you think, when you get this information, that is going to be the most useful for you and the development of your program, right? Next is the fun part. What do you want to ask? So once you know how you're going to ask, who you want to ask, why do you want to ask, and when do you want to ask, now's the fun part of deciding what do you want to ask. So if you want to pause here and write these, go through these answers and prompts, go ahead and pause now, do that. Otherwise, we're going to keep on going. So pause if you need to, come on back when you're done, and we'll keep going. Okay, so here are some ideas for survey questions, right? You probably have some specifics in your mind already, right? Consider adding these to get yourself some information moving forward, right? So number one on this list is your rounding questions to like 2.0, right? Next, here's a question. Are your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions valued, right? That helps you get at, do my families, do the people that I serve, do they feel like they belong, and that what they have to say matters, right? Super important. Now the next one is communication clear, respectful, and kind? Now you can come up with a variation for this question or any of the others by going back to your core values, going back to your mission, to ask the questions that get at, are we still doing this thing? Are we still doing the thing that we said we're going to do? Are we coming across as the program we mean to be, right? And you'll know when you ask. Right. So the wording that you may use might be a little different depending on your mission and your vision and your core values, right? You can go back to that and see keywords and then ask, are we doing that, right? Specifically, how do you see this in action? That could be a really powerful question to ask as well. Next, how well do we consider the individual needs of your child? Super important, because that's the key to the work that you're doing day to day, right? We're serving children, we're tending to children, we're educating children, we're helping children become the full expression of who they're meant to be. We're there to help them overcome obstacles that might be coming up for the individual child. So ask the family, do they believe that you're considering the individual needs of their child? Next, this is always a fun one to end on, is there a question we could have asked? What is it, and what would be the answer? Or what is it, and now's the time to ask. When you gather those questions, and maybe they have an answer for it, or maybe they want you to answer it, that's a wonderful way to do follow-up after you get the survey back from people, right? I can't underline enough the importance of follow-up after a survey, right? When you ask people their insight and then you go silent, that can do more damage than not asking at all, right? Well, you asked me, I told you, and there was nothing that happened around that. That could be, you could feel really defeated by that. And I'm sure that's not how you want your families to feel, right? Or your employees, if you're doing this process for employee surveys, okay? So following up and sharing, what were the survey responses? Did you see a theme? Did you see some areas where that need your attention? Do you have, is there a spot that maybe people don't quite understand? Why is it that we're doing this the way that we're doing it? There's a place and a moment to do some family ed or some clarification or sharing more information that maybe they don't have. Right. So these survey questions with the follow-up can help with the communication and clarity and building trust back and forth between you and the person that you're surveying. So 100% underline, put a star by it and an arrow to follow up. I recommend when you get all your survey questions by a particular deadline, right? By say you ask people to finish this by the 15th. You've reminded them on the 13th, hey, you've got 2 more days, 1 more day. Give yourself a deadline of 2 weeks after you've had the deadline, right? To give some sort of feedback. And I recommend that because I believe in the importance of follow-up. And I also think I want to credit my mom for this, right? And it's kind of a silly story, but it's just shaped who I am. So when you get a present, you need to write a thank you note. Let that person know that you received it and that you appreciate it, and in 2 weeks, right? If it's after 2 weeks, it's so rude. Right. So I learned that from my mama. And so I've got the 2-week deadline in my head. We even as young children, we celebrate Christmas in my family. And it felt pretty harsh, but she said, okay, after we open up all the presents, it's thank you note time at the dining room table. And that was a tradition that before we could really dive in and play with all that really good stuff, we had to write a thank you note. At that point, as a child, it felt really harsh because I really just wanted to go and play with my new dolls or my new toys or my new thing that I got, my new building set. And the importance of writing a thank you note and extending gratitude was so important that was the expectation. So 2 weeks sticks in my head. So consider 2 weeks. All right, so it's time to write that again, right? Right, we're going to take some time to write out what survey questions you want to put together in the next survey that you're going to put out, okay? So we're going to pause, take a pause, write those down. Some important things to remember is to keep the number of questions that you ask pretty short, right? I recommend not more than 10. In fact, it's better if it's more like 6 or 7. And I know you're thinking, but I want to know more about that. I want to know more than that. Okay, that's cool. Be mindful that if I see that there are 15, 20 questions on a questionnaire or a survey, I am less likely to fill out that survey, right? Let families know this should take you 7 minutes or less, right? Let them know the commitment of time is about this amount of time, right? They're more apt to respond and give you thoughtful feedback if they know they're not going to have to sit down and write a dissertation for you, okay? So little thoughts there. So hit the pause button, put together some of your best questions that you want to ask, and then come on back when you're ready. Okay, we're back. Deep breath. Now, I've already talked a little bit about the importance of gratitude and follow up, and you know the 2 week rule that I have. So, why do you think that's so important, right? It's important for lots of reasons. It's important to let people know that when you ask questions, you genuinely want to hear what they have to say, and you genuinely appreciate that candor and that honest sharing of feedback, right? Especially if you have it where people can either add their name to it as an option or can keep it completely anonymous, right? So the importance of letting people know, thank you for sharing that, and here's what we're going to do with that information. Here's what we heard from you, and here's our plan going forward, right? That lets your people know that you are acting, you're in an action mode because you've asked, you've heard, and you've made a decision to consider what suggestions you might get or what feedback you might get if you need to make a change or an adjustment or keep things running as they're running because everybody's happy with it, right? So if if it's not broken, don't fix it. Say thank you. You all really appreciate the way that we do this. So we're going to keep that going from as we carry on, right? Now, another reason of the importance of gratitude and follow up is about your emotional bank account, right? So, what do I mean by emotional bank account? So, if you imagine those moments where we reach out and connect with our families or our staff, each of those moments is like a deposit in an emotional bank account. When we smile at a family or at each other, that's making a deposit into your emotional bank account. When we're scowly, that can be a debit out of your account, withdrawal, right? So you could use that analogy to think about how am I building my emotional bank account with each of the families that I serve and each of the community businesses, connections, partnerships that you have, your team as well, right? We do this in the classroom. It's a very similar concept in doing it with the families and the other people that we connect with and serve, right? So in considering the emotional bank account, what's this? What are your bucket fillers? What are your bank account deposits? What does it look like, right? What makes you feel like there's a deeper connection, or they care about me, or they respect me? That good feeling of us in relationship. What are the things that happen that fill your bank, fill your bucket, right? And you'll see I'm talking about bucket. There's a wonderful children's book. You probably have it in your classroom, and it's How Full Is Your Bucket? And it helps children understand about building up each other and filling each other's emotional bank account or their bucket, right? Okay, so what are your bucket fillers? What are the bucket fillers of your community partners? Next, what are the bucket emptiers? What are the withdrawals that come out of your emotional bank account, out of your bucket, if you will? When somebody cuts in line in front of me and I'm a preschooler, that's a bucket emptier. When someone pushes me on the playground, that's a bucket emptier. That is an emotional bank account withdrawal, right? So if you apply that in your relationship with adults, what would you consider, what would you imagine to be their bucket emptiers, right? What a bold and courageous question to ask. I wonder what people would say. Okay, next. What would you say is the currency of you or your community right now, right? It could be food, it could be time, it could be words of affirmation, right? Think about what is the language that your team or your family speaks that lets them know you appreciate them, respect them, consider them, right? As an important part of your community. What can you do to let them know? And that's going to be different for each person, right? Certainly there are some similarities, but we got to think it's more than pizza. Pizza on Fridays is great. And if that's the only thing you do, then I encourage you to consider diversifying the way that you show people that you appreciate them. Diversify the way that you make deposits into your team and your family's emotional bank account, right? Next, how do you give and receive recognition, right? Oftentimes we give recognition in the way that we receive it, right? We give appreciation, we give love, we give consideration in the way that we receive it and we recognize it, right? So you may have people in your life who maybe their currency, maybe their way that they receive recognition is a thank you note or a note written on a piece of paper. Okay, and maybe that feels really good to us. So when we write that and give it to people, we believe, okay, they must feel appreciated or recognized because I wrote them a note. That's cool. And are there other ways, right? Maybe it feels good to you to be recognized at a staff meeting in front of everybody, perfect attendance, or you did this amazing thing with that child who was falling apart in the hallway, and I just want to give a shout out to your patience and your grace and your ability to work with children who are really struggling. And some people will love that, and some people will be mortified by that. So the importance of how you give and receive recognition, the importance of understanding that the way you receive and give recognition might be different than the way other people give and receive recognition. How can you find out? How can you ask, right? It might be one of your survey questions. Okay, next. How do you or others in your community feel seen, right? What does that look like? And that's a really interesting question to ask. And even more interesting is the diversity of answers you will most likely receive, right? How do I know that you notice my work? Toni Morrison said that, how did it go? Do your eyes light up when your child or anybody else's child enters the room, right? We are all looking to be seen and noticed and heard first, and valued and recognized and repeated and appreciated following that, right? So what does that look like is a great question to ask and find out. What is their language of appreciation? You've probably all heard of the 5 love languages. There's a kind of a variation of that around appreciation. What is the language of appreciation? Is it gifts? Is it quality time? Is it a handwritten note? Is it fill in the blank? What is it? All right, and let's take a deep breath. And there we go. That's session 4. We've got one more to go, and I will see you next time.